Well, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're viewing from or participating from. We're so excited about this panel that's been put together. Want to recognize the Rare Revolution, and they have just been not just a good partner, but have developed great friendships through the connections that Eden made all these years ago with Rebecca. And we see Gavin again on here. It's so good to see you all. This panel is on building trust through appropriate proactive engagement and communication strategies. And with that, Rebecca, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and hello and welcome to everyone to our panel discussion today. So whether you are watching this live or on catch up, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to engage with this session. I'd also like to thank Eden and Jeff for inviting us to take part in this Congress. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Eden and Jeff and joining one of their events for the first time, they've been building virtual events for equity of access long before COVID made it mainstream, and their programming for their virtual events is really an incredible reflection of the cross-sector environment in which rare disease sits, and we're always really thrilled to take part. In just a moment, I shall turn the floor over to our esteemed panelists today who are going to introduce themselves. But to kick things off, my name is Rebecca Stewart and I am co-founder of Rare Revolution magazine, the Rare Youth Revolution and Teddington Trust. And alongside my co-founder and sister Nicola Miller, we've been creating age-appropriate, accessible rare disease content for nearly 10 years. Like many, our journey really was born out of personal experience, but our passion for resources started with a character called Little Ted, who's an intrepid young bear who helps young children understand their rare condition, xeroderma pigmentosum, and it was created by Nicola to help her son. So you can find out more about Little Ted from the Teddington Trust stand here at the Congress. Over the last 10 years, we have witnessed a dramatic change in the increase of rare disease awareness, both in terms of accessibility, taking rare disease content out of scientific journals, but also the sheer volume that's now being created. There's always room for improvement, but we're greatly heartened to see the great positive direction that awareness and education is moving in. So today I am joined by a leading expert of professionals, all passionate about elevating awareness in order to positively impact the rare disease community. And I'm going to try my best to lead them through a lively and informative discussion covering everything from language, best practices, defining the right motives, building relationships and getting started. So with no further delay, I'd like to welcome you all, and to kick off our first discussion point of language today, if you could all introduce yourselves and then maybe just add a short explanation of what patient centricity means to each of you. Shanali, would you like to make a start?
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. I'm Shanali Pereira. I'm a person living with vasculitis. I'm also a contemporary artist, educator, and a retired rheumatologist. I had to give up my career as a rheumatologist because of my underlying condition. And I took up the digital medium to as a way of expressing what I was going through and as a way of communicating my lived experience. And to me, when what does patient-centered care or person-centered care even mean? I think I would like to be seen as a person first, not just as a condition. And to me, that's what patient-centered or person-centered care means, because I'm a lot more than the disease. There are many elements and aspects to me, and the disease or the condition impacts them all. So that's my take on it.
Amazing. Diana, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Dina Kraftik. Hello. I'm dialing in today from Switzerland. I work for a pharmaceutical company called V4 Pharma, and it's a specialty pharma company focusing on iron nephrology and cardiorenal therapies. And The company did expand its orphan disease portfolio area, which I have the great pleasure to work on, a rare disease called ANCA-associated vasculitis. From my background, I'm 17 years in the pharma industry now. I have a background in pharmaceutical technical business and business psychology. And I had a great opportunity to work with Shanali Pereira, but also with Rebecca on joint projects about raising awareness about ANCA-associated vasculitis. What does patient centricity means for me? And as I'm the, let's say, pharma representative on this panel, what I would say is that if an organization managed throughout the development process to put a strong focus on the patient, means, for example, if it's in the clinical development, include the patient's voice in development of, for example, a synopsis for a clinical trial, up to the process when materials get launched and produced and shared on the market, on how they resonate with the patient. I think this is really about patient centricity. Another thing where I think a person could also well test if your organization really has a true patient focus is really looking into what kind of development you are in. Because I think there it really shows gives the right signal if very early on in the whole process the company is supporting the respective person on the patient advocacy or engagement front in order to start up and engage. So this is where I see patient centricity.
Thank you, Deanna. Stephen, do you want to go next?
Yes, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen O'Farrell, and I'm a director at a communications consultancy called Aurora. I'm joining today from Dublin in Ireland, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. Just to give you a little bit of information about my experience. So I've kind of had the privilege of working on a number of different rare disease programs and different rare disease conditions, both in the clinical trial recruitment space, but also on more kind of, I guess, community focused programs that aim to bring people together and create connections. My background is in patient advocacy. So I was previously a communications manager for a patient advocacy group called Arthritis Ireland in Ireland. In terms of patient centricity, I think for me, there's two aspects to it. First of all, there is a mindset. So I think when we think about patient centricity, it's in your day-to-day work, are you asking questions about how does this affect patients or how does this benefit patients? Are we addressing patient need? Asking yourselves those questions in your day-to-day working life or in the activities that you're doing is really, really important. But then beyond the mindset, there's also a second aspect, I think, which is about having the kind of energy and the will to actually translate that into tangible solutions that make a difference to patients. Because we can talk and think about patient centricity all we want, but unless that's actually translating into things that are really making a difference, it's not particularly valuable for anyone.
Thank you. And Gavin?
Hello, everyone. I'm Gavin Jones. I'm Global Advisor, Rare Diseases at Open Health. We're a healthcare communications access and evidence agency. What does that actually mean? Well, it means that we help develop communications and tools for physicians, payers, and patients. And we mainly work with pharmaceutical clients, but we also work directly with patient groups and health systems. My background is 20 odd years in the industry and agency. I'm also a trustee of a small patient charity in the UK. So I hope I bring a different perspective as well, just on top of my industry experience. For me, patient centricity, there are two statements that I and my organization strive to meet. And the first is putting the patient first. So where appropriate, I can't exactly ask my facilities director to put the patient first, but where appropriate, where we are developing solutions and tools that involve the progress in in outcomes for patients, we should certainly put them at the center of our thinking. And secondly, ensuring that patients are seen as true partners, and we are co-creating our communications and our solutions with patient organizations and patient groups. So that for me is really where we try and deliver on patient centricity.
Thank you, everyone. And it's so interesting, isn't it, to see that although it was broadly all in the same direction, very different, you know, that interplay of what patient centricity was different absolutely for every person. And I think that brings us really nicely onto the use of language in awareness campaigns and how important that is for the different stakeholders. Shanley, do you maybe want to start off with a point, the point of view from both your personal, but also with your healthcare professional hat on, about the importance of using the right language, and also perhaps include in that any cultural differences that you think are important in this area? Oh, you're just on mute, Shanley.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Rebecca. I am going to have both hats on now. I think, as a clinician, as well as a person living with a rare long-term condition. I think, firstly, what I need to say is that invisible world of that lived experience, that, can I call it the human experience, living with an illness, is something that you don't get to learn in a textbook. And it is not something, and it is different to each and every person. So each person will have their own unique journey. And that I find from my own experience, and also working with Diana on See Me, Hear Me, that campaign, my personal experience is that there is a big gap when it comes to understanding what that lived experience really looks like for the person going through it, and the carers and the people, the healthcare professionals on one side. And that gap is of what governs, what influences that lived experience, that shift that the person going through the condition, the shift they have to go through, moving from a person to becoming a patient. And the rest of the family, what they have to go through, friends and family and work colleagues, going through that same journey or parallel journey along with that person. And those hidden layers, I think, are so important to not ignore anymore or pay more attention to. And here I'm going to highlight the World Health Organization definition of health, because what it says is it's not just the emotional, it's addressing all aspects of a person, the emotional, the social, the physical, not just the absence of disease or infirmity. So I think addressing the person as a whole. And also when it comes to patient information, having a campaign, what that campaign does, or what that awareness does to someone who's going through that illness. I think firstly, that relatability, I'm not alone. There are others who are going through that same journey. The whole, me too, I'm going through the same thing. You may have an amazingly supporting family, an amazingly tremendous support with your inner circle, but they don't necessarily know exactly what you're going through. But when you have other people sharing their stories, telling this is what it's like, there's a relatability, thinking I'm not alone, I can better, someone else is going through the same journey as me. And also I think it allows that person to get a better understanding and make sense of what's going on. And I think that's a huge thing that, again, we don't pay attention to. How do we make sense when we go through an illness? Again, this is where the cultural variation comes, because each one of us will perceive illness, will perceive pain differently. And just as there is an individual difference or variation, there's a cultural variation in it as well. And that greatly impacts on how, again, what governs, what influences your lived experience, how with your medication to how you understand your condition. And taking comfort that there are others out there and there is support available. And there's a community that you can be, it can be your tribe, you know, in terms of you feel included in that community. And I tell you from personal experience, there are no words to describe that, you know, that sense of belonging and, you know, being part of something with others. It gives you collective strength, I think, to move forward. And I think that is something that I believe needs to be shared with the wider health community as well as the public and patients. I hope I gave you it was a bit of an eclectic overview. Sorry.
No, that was amazing. And Stephen, if we maybe come to you and then Gavin next, as people who are involved in the creation of campaigns, how difficult are your roles in making sure that language is appropriate, and what approaches do you kind of work to in that for that?
Sure, I think it's a really important question, and one that I think is easy to overlook. We hear a lot about the importance of using plain language, but it is something that I think from a pharmaceutical standpoint is something that has long been raised as an issue, but I do think it can be an issue from a patient advocacy group perspective as well. And I say that from my experience working in one that just because we were a patient advocacy group definitely didn't mean we were always producing stuff that everyone understood. And to Gavin's point when he was introducing his definition of patient centricity, it's really, really important that when we do produce any materials that we are co-creating them with patients. That certainly helps to make sure that what we produce will be understood and will be in plain language. But I also think, I guess, when we are co-creating, the representativeness of the group of people that we are co-creating with is also really crucial. So making sure that we're looking at different socioeconomic backgrounds, for example. It can be quite easy to co-create things with people who might be middle class and well educated and already the kind of typical empowered patient. But if you just focus on those people, then you are going to leave out a large proportion of the population, people who actually probably need the materials more than anybody else. So I think just making sure that what we do is representative. And then just one final point on this is around, I guess, digital accessibility. So when it comes to considering any kind of websites or resources that we're developing for people, especially when the target audience, there might be a high proliferation of people who have a physical disability, that we are like always really, really careful to make sure that what we produce is I guess to the required standards of accessibility, and that we're defining what level the resources meet.
It's such good points, isn't it? And I think that even things like the way that we to use the word patients or sufferers, you know, I think we even in the last few years we've come such a long way in really thinking about how these words impact people and leading with a, you know, a people first, a human first narrative. But it is difficult to come away from that. I mean, Gavin, obviously this is something you guys have worked on a lot as well. Where, you know, what are the challenges and what approaches do you guys take?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Stephen in his points around ensuring that you consider what we should describe as your regular patients, really, rather than people like Shanali, who are, you know, expert patients that, like Stephen says, we can work with to develop communications. We need to go beyond that and think of patients out there that maybe aren't as empowered as the advocacy community out there. And I've got a couple of examples around that. Firstly, you know, plain language summaries of clinical trials are becoming more prevalent. And one project we delivered for one of our clients we started with one of our medical writers, aiming to simplify the language around the outcomes of the study. That was then passed on to a patient advocate with experience in that disease area, which was then passed on to one of the advocacy groups working in that therapy area. And even with all those different stages, we had to challenge ourselves around the language that was being used to ensure it really would land and be simple to understand for patients out there. So, it's not just, you don't do this in isolation. Co-creation, again, is very, very important, and consideration of your audience is essential. Another area of how to get the language right is understanding where someone is on their own journey with the disease. And one area that we have worked on is within patient support materials and programs, having a measure to assess where the patient is in terms of their empowerment journey, and using different materials bespoke to where that patient is. And we use the patient activation measures to support understanding, where they are on the journey, what information they need to help them get to the next stage. Then we can reassess the patient activation measure, and we can supply other forms of information that will suit them where they are then on their journey. So I think it's important to recognize that it's not just one point in time. We're trying to progress the knowledge of the rare disease community, and you can do that in stages, and you can do it by assessing where they currently are and where you need to get them to.
I think that's such a valuable point as well. It's that having the right information delivered at the right time in the right format, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Deanna, this is something that we were so impressed as well when we worked with Vi for Pharma on the Spotlight edition, was the interest in translation, because of course it's not just about accessibility of language from plain English, but it's also, translation. So much material is produced in English, which of course, again, when you've got empowered advocates and patients, that's okay. But when we start to look at the diversity, then that becomes a big problem. That was obviously a big part of your remit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, and then move on to the See Me, Hear Me campaign, and maybe introduce us to that?
Sure, I would love to. Yeah, with regards to different audiences and different language needs, I mean, on one hand, they're the physicians. They would have different information needs. Often it's a common language with English, but even for doctors, we also felt, let's offer some of our materials in different languages, just that they have an ease in also digesting the information, especially if they want to fill in their gaps. If it's like a complex autoimmune disease, there might be areas which they detect that they have gaps and they want to learn more. And how do you do that? You learn easier if something is provided in your mother tongue, right? And for patients, the same thing. What I personally realized when we worked on materials is that when you are in the situation that you're working on one hand with doctors and on the other hand with patient advocacy groups and patient advocates, that you think you might be able to translate like a scientific language into a plain text, and sometimes it's not so easy, right? So what we have done, next to language providers that helped us, also to engage with resource providers that are experienced in translating, like say, scientific communication into well understood. And that's something that Stephen also mentioned. What is important alongside this process is that you always work in co-creation with your community. I think that should anyway be always the start. And this is what we did also with the See Me, Hear Me initiative for my ANCA vasculitis. So we have developed a digital platform, but this is all much more also with materials for disease information and disease education for ANCA-associated vasculitis. And the first thing, or the first step that we did after conducting, some homework, some market research to understand, okay, like getting some basics, then was immediately going to our community and get their view on things and their understanding and what they go through. They're really the experts because they live with this disease, right? And we started back then with workshops, with exchange. And another thing that I found very important is if you come to an area where you have an established community, you need to ask, how can I contribute? How can I add here something, right? Because this is not like, pharma will know it and just points out something. If you really want to truly partner with your community, you need to identify, okay, there's great material already out there. Where can we find our spot? And this was the first step that we have identified. How can we be of help? Can we add on to this disease information and education joint goal that we have? And that's another important thing from the beginning on, making very clear that you're working towards the same goal, that this is not a one-way street, that you work together, that it's for both sides something in, and establish this strong collaboration. With regards to duration of the whole program, I think it's very difficult to estimate that, right? Because I think it depends really on the therapeutic area or the disease you're in. How well is your community already interconnected? How big can you go? How many people could you interconnect with? So these are all factors that I think that play into this.
Thank you. And Shanali, obviously being part of that campaign as well and that program, how was it for you taking part? Obviously it was amazing to see the art that you created and the expression of that, but what was that process like and the partnering like? How did you find it from your side?
It was really empowering is the one word that I could use, is empowering, because for me, being able to connect and work together with Diana and her team was the first time that after I'd given up my career, I'd not actually been part of a team. So suddenly to be part of a team and doing something that is meaningful and it'll make let's say a meaningful impact on other people's lives, was actually, I found purpose and meaning to what I was going through by doing that as an extension. And I have no more words to describe how much it meant to me being part of that team and, getting that opportunity to contribute was just from a personal level, from a professional level, because I I got the opportunity, not just a person living with vasculitis, but also I had chances to use my clinician's hat, and I had mostly also the chance to create the artwork, which was absolutely, it was way out of my comfort zone. I was totally challenged, and it was the best challenge that I got, because the opportunity to come up with the artwork that I did was just it really gave me a sense of shall we say, it added to my self-worth a lot, just to be part of this amazing project. And it was not just about a drug, that I really need to mention this, because I think it was about the whole, how do we give all these people who are going through the same journey, speaking different languages, different parts of different countries, how do we give them a voice, and how do we highlight that story, and how do we highlight the unmet needs? And that's, making their invisible visible was the whole heart of the campaign. So for me, it just, I think it helped me to come to terms with who I have become as well. what I have now become with my journey. It was a stepping stone for me, and yeah, to find that version of me. So I am truly grateful to have had that opportunity and to have worked with Diana, to have made that connection. It was an amazing experience.
It's so lovely to hear you talk about being part of the team, because I think that's something that we probably think about less, is that we talk about co-creation, but we don't often talk about that emotion around becoming part, becoming a new team together. And that's really lovely to hear you say that. And from a personal point of view as well, I think there are many advocates that can really would really agree with that, having that sense of purpose, being able to do something that really makes you feel like you're contributing, and by giving your expertise and your opinion, you can really help to make a difference to empower others in the same way that you've been able to. And Diana talked about the importance of having that shared vision, but that clearly defined joined goal.
Yeah.
Gavin and Stephen, maybe you want to jump in here with a bit around what the importance of having those clearly defined motives. Why are we doing this campaign? And do those motives line up across everybody that's involved in the journey? I don't know who wants to go first. Any take?
I'll kick off if that's okay, Stephen, because
Absolutely.
I just want to talk about, and apologies that the sun is setting here. I don't want to bring the blind down because we don't see the sun much in Wales, so I hope you can still see me. Anyway, I was in a field-based role many moons ago when in the UK we brought out an industry joint working policy, and this was there to build trust in partnership between pharmaceutical companies and health systems. And I still hold firm the principles behind that joint working policy, and I completely agree with Deanna. You just got to be really clear and have the confidence to be really clear on the benefit of a project to each stakeholder group. And if you have that clear transparency from the outset, then the trust and the partnership is just so much stronger. I also just want to quickly pick up on a point that Shanley raised, which is that the project she was describing wasn't about a medicine, it was beyond the medicine. And I think that's an important message that needs to continue to be driven within pharmaceutical companies, that they need to have the confidence to look beyond their individual point in a treatment pathway and consider how they improve outcomes across the whole treatment journey for a patient. And back to creating win-win partnerships. If the whole pathway is improved, the point that they are most interested will be improved. So I think it's really important that we look beyond medicine and beyond treatments, and that's why I think that point by Shanley was so important. I'll hand over to you now, Stephen.
Great, thanks, Gavin. And I think kind of just building on that, one way to look at it, I suppose, is if you think of a Venn diagram. You've got the priorities of the patient group is one circle, and the priorities of the pharmaceutical company is another circle, and there will be a significant crossover within that. So I think when we talk about creating shared goals, it's that space that we want to be really focusing on. The other thing I think is kind of important from a patient group perspective is it'll depend on every situation, and every project is different. But if a pharmaceutical company proactively come to you, for example, to look to engage on a project, I think it's important to, I guess, first of all, be clear on what the company's objective is, so you're clear on that, but also to talk about what what are the different roles on a project, and thinking about how decision making is going to be made, because it's not every project will be maybe a kind of full partnership. Sometimes it might be that one of the parties is playing more of an advisory role than a decision-making role, or maybe more of even just like a testing role. So when something is developed, there's like a final stage of testing. So I think just making sure that when a project is beginning, that those roles are established. The ideal is obviously partnership, but partnership isn't always the way that everybody is thinking about these projects. So it's just really important that that is kind of established up front. And then the final thing I would say on it is just establishing, I guess, principles of working together. That should be something that I guess is maybe the first thing you actually go about co-creating, is what are our principles of working together. And that should include how decisions are being made, but also should consider, for example, the different boundaries of a project. So for example, there might be boundaries around time, there might be boundaries related to the regulatory code within a country, or also I guess the realities of life. There's going to be budgetary boundaries. So just making sure that all of that is clearly laid out in a kind of ways of working document that both parties sign up to at the beginning is a really important step.
Thank you, Stephen. So Deanna, to Stephen's point, not all of these relationships are going to result in partnering as an ideal, but what's your message? Why should industry and patient groups partner together for awareness? What are the benefits, and where can it still be improved? I know you and I discussed training and training for those patient advocacy roles and the challenges around this kind of rapidly growing area. Why should we work together, and how have you found that process?
Sure. So I think, and I think we heard that earlier on the panel, it can create a true win-win situation for both sides. Pharma can bring respective resources in order to drive some specific things through different areas and enhance messaging with the community that we do jointly. So I think that certainly is a key point, and that you can really work with your community, understand the true needs, and as Gavin pointed out, in the end, both sides benefit. With regards to patient advocacy and learnings, I also faced a situation that we were in some areas learning organization. How I started is I worked very closely with my medical and compliance function to understand what are the regulations. You start with FPA, you read the guidelines, you make it understand, you get a sense, and then there are national regulations, and you work with your national teams and understand what are the regulations on a national level that sets a frame. And then I think really it's about setting clear expectations and making those clear, and transparent communication certainly helps in that regard.
For sure. And Deanna, just a follow-up question. It's something that's been a bit topical this week. We've noticed in a couple of areas, but contracts when we're working together, and Stephen touched on this as well, where one of the things that we see is that sometimes the contracts that come, because they've come from compliance and legal departments, they're quite heavy-handed. And so sometimes they feel maybe a little bit inappropriate for the setting. How can we work, what can industry do, and how can we work with industry to streamline that process so that there isn't a potential conflict right at the start, and so that we can start off with something really positive? Because in our experience, where a contract might be less than perfect, it's never with malice or ill intent. It's normally because it's a legacy thing from a much bigger piece of work. And any changes we've asked for have always been very happily accepted. So from that point of view, it's not a problem. But of course, if you're faced with this first off, and perhaps you don't have the confidence or the understanding to say, well, actually, this is a, you know, perhaps a legacy clause. Where can industry help smooth that over?
That's a really good point, because yeah, sometimes contracts can be very long. I think it's a bit of a cultural change that we're seeing from historically of seeing the risk of engaging and the problems that could be caused with it versus the risk not doing it. And what I recognize as a very nice and good trend, if you look at all the health authority sites, FDA, if you go to EMA, if you check the page on the WHO, FPA, there are a lot of guidance documents that do encourage pharma industry to collaborate with patient association, because they have seen the benefit of it and they made it a priority for them. And I think sometimes things take some time, and sometimes people are a bit scared in the beginning. Coming from that history to coming to that, it's about creating this good confidence that you create something good with this. And yeah, I think that can help, and experiences on projects.
Yeah, and Gavin, it seems really obvious why pharma should include patients and patient groups in co-creation, but why should patient groups consider working with pharma? Obviously, it works both ways, and both sides have got something valuable to add. Again, as somebody that works with both sides to create these campaigns, what would you know, what's your take on that, and what do you say with, you know, how can patient groups get involved? Where do they start? What does that journey look like from the other side?
Sure. And together with the sunset now, I've got the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre going on outside. But I will continue on. I just got some thoughts. I've been thinking about this today in terms of sort of top tips of making the step towards working with a pharmaceutical company. But before I do that, I suppose just in terms of the benefits, I think with the right partnership, you can accelerate your progress as a patient organization. You can amplify your messages as a patient organization. You can improve outcomes that you are striving for, that pharma are also striving for, through better collaboration with the industry. So I think it's multifactorial in terms of why. And as Deanna says, there's more guidance now with industry on how to effectively engage. I would say, you know, we as I'm putting myself in the industry here, we haven't always got it right. And that, I think, has damaged trust, and public perception of pharma is pretty poor in terms of comparing it with the tobacco industry. So there's a lot of work to be done. But, you know, there are great projects out there like See Me, Hear Me, which demonstrate positive partnership and demonstrate the value to both sides. So I think we have some nice shoots of spring in terms of a different approach. And I heard this the other day, and I believe it myself. I think rare disease has the opportunity to lead the way in better partnerships between the patient community and industry. It's the need is so significant within rare disease, and patient communities and even industry communities are smaller and I think more nimble. And I think we should really see ourselves as the leaders in the future of partnerships between the stakeholder groups. Quickly, I think 3 tips for patient organizations, and excuse the pun, but be patient is the first one. You know, not every organization is as far advanced in their approach as V4, for example. So be aware that there may be some sensitivities or nervousness around engaging with the patient community. So just be mindful of, it's not just you that may be feeling nervous about developing a relationship. And like Deanna says, there's many guidance and regulations around engaging with the patient community that pharma takes very seriously, because we're all working together to build trust in us as an industry. I think be confident in what you have to offer from day one. You know, the value you can bring in, for example, the company better understanding the burden of illness, better understanding what outcome measures should be included in clinical trials, better understanding the patient journey, so you can collectively identify where the blocks are within a pathway. So there's lots of reasons why you can really add value as an organization. And finally, just be open. Be open to learn together, and find a way forward. Be open to sharing joint goals and finding, as Stephen says, where you meet in that Venn diagram, and be encouraged that there are really good examples out there where it's demonstrated this worked effectively.
Thank you, Gavin. And something else I'm interested in is, so if you are a patient organisation and you think I'd really like to partner on something with industry, how do you, who do you approach it? Pharma websites are, big, and they're, you go to LinkedIn, they have a lot of employees. Who do you reach out to start a conversation if you're brand new to partnerships?
Yeah, there's a couple of roles. I mean, the first thing to say, and I don't want to make it complicated or complex, but every company will have a likely lead role in external partnerships, and Deanna is a great example of someone in a role like that. I think if you're looking for just some simplistic guidance, often a company will have a patient advocacy team who are there to lead relationships and communication with a patient organization. If there isn't a patient advocacy team in place, and there may not be in the early phases of clinical development, another good department to potentially approach is medical affairs in a pharma company, because they transition across both clinical development and treatment launch and introduction to various markets. So they have a good umbrella overview of what's going on within an organization, and can help navigate as to where a patient organization may be able to assist in supporting a company's approach and strategy, whether that's in clinical development or when they're introducing the new treatment to different health systems.
That's great, thank you. Hopefully there's not, if Deanna will be killing us if there's a sudden flurry of people contacting her now to start up campaigns. Stephen, do you want to touch, I know we spoke about the importance of training and upskilling. What can patient organisations do to prepare themselves for partnering? Because obviously it's, pharma is heavily regulated, and like Gavin said, and Deanna intimated, rightly nervous about some of these interactions. And because patient advocacy has been driven at such a speed, I think some of the support systems within companies haven't matured at the same rate. What can patient groups do so that they're in the best possible position to go into a partnership?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think when you have a look around, there's not a huge amount of resources out there, but what there is out there is very high quality. So EUPATI, which is EUPATI, they have a whole series of patient engagement training. Now they have national platforms in various different countries, but even I think if they don't have a platform in your own country, you can get connected with them, and there might be an opportunity to have that training done in another country. I guess that the other consideration with training like that is there is a cost associated with it. I think EUPATI's training is about €1,000, but that can be something as well that if you are engaged with a company already, that is something they would potentially be open to sponsoring, for example, or providing a grant for. So there are kind of different ways to look about how you go about funding training like that. But by all accounts, it is very comprehensive training. As you say, Rebecca, there's lots of complexities working in the pharma world, and lots of acronyms as well to understand. So I think that sort of training is really valuable for anybody engaging with the company, and I guess it puts you from a knowledge perspective. It would put you on a level pegging with maybe some of the people that you're dealing with in there when it comes to questions like clinical trial design or access and reimbursement negotiations. It covers all of that sort of stuff. So really valuable to do.
Yeah, and it's probably worth saying there are some other training providers. I think HoR does have their summer and winter school, and I think Nord and Global Genes over in America, they also have some useful resources as well. Probably not quite as comprehensive, but it's all a great place to start. Shanley, from your point of view, is there anything that you from your journey of partnering that if you would have made your journey easier if you'd known it at the start? You know, if you were to give a kind of a top tip to someone that's starting their journey in partnering with pharma, what would that be?
Top tip. Well, I think that what I mentioned before, that whole kind of taking that holistic approach and being part of the team to say, hey, we are going to address not just the side effects or the physical symptoms, but a person as a whole. And I think that's working with pharma. I think that to all pharma companies, what I would say is, see me as a person first. So the top tip to anyone who partners with pharma, I would say, have that as your main focus and try and address the person as a whole. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. It's really about having the confidence, isn't it, to say, like we said right at the very start of this, it's not just my interesting disease. I'm a human being and it impacts me in a lot of different ways. So it's not looking at just those physical symptoms. Now, I appreciate we've got about 8 minutes left. If anyone does have any questions, please pop them in the chat. I suppose just to finish up, and I'll throw this out to you all. Obviously, the digital revolution has really connected us more than ever. And that has never been more apparent than in the last 12 months, where the whole world and their wife has learned how to Zoom, including my 8-year-old who cut me off a call last week to Zoom her cousins and ended my meeting so that she could get on my account. So how do we break through the noise? Like, how do we really ensure that the content we're creating is adding value and not just adding to the noise that's out there? And I'll open that up to the floor if you want to all just dive in, if you've got something to add.
Should I kick us off?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, perfect. So just a couple of thoughts on this. So I think first of all, I guess it goes without saying, but having doing an audit to understand what is already out there, making sure that you have good insight into what the unmet needs of the community is, and then when you marry those two things up, you should be able to spot gaps where there is unmet need but no existing resources. I think as we've talked about, co-creating with a representative group is really, really critical. But the other thing that, and I think we can learn this from kind of, I guess, the digital revolution, taking some principles from that, I think trying to produce something that is, I guess, a minimal viable product, something that basically does the job, but is out in the world at the earliest possible stage, before maybe a major investment is made or before a huge amount of time is spent on something. So getting an early version out into the world and actually piloting with that, so that you can basically learn about the impact that that is making, you can then evolve it and iterate it and build it. I think that type of approach is really, really important, because it means that we're being efficient with the resources that we have, but we're also, it's also getting to the people that need it at the earliest possible opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think that point about letting things build also is really important. I wonder if there is a lot of pressure for organizations to come up with new campaigns all of the time, when actually what they need to do is really work on one and then grow it and develop it and allow it the time it needs to build momentum. Anyone else want to jump in?
I'll go on, Shanley. I'll go after you. Go on.
To very quickly say, in terms of barriers when it comes to communication, or considering various different audiences and cultural barriers and various other barriers, using a medium like art, which transcends barriers, because art is something that is accessible to all, irrespective of what culture, what color, what language. And I think that's something I really wanted to highlight, because using something that you can communicate with anyone and everyone, I think was very important.
Absolutely. Gavin, did you want to go?
Yeah, I'm just going to build on your build, basically, Rebecca. And I agree with Shanley around finding a medium that I suppose can transcend different platforms is an important one, and ensuring that, as you say, there's a journey. It's not just bish bash bosh done. There's a journey that you're on with the campaign that builds. I think sustainability is another important factor that we need to consider within these sort of communication partnerships. I think patient groups have probably had their fingers burnt before now, where a pharma company was very prevalent, and we all know the challenges of clinical development programs and how things can change, and medicines don't make it, and then suddenly the pharma companies is no longer seen. I think pharma do not want to repeat that, because it does nothing for our reputation and the trust with the patient community. So sustainability, I think, is an important factor for patient groups to consider when they're thinking about partnering with industry. What is the life of the campaign, and potentially can that campaign be handed over to the patient community at some point for them to continue to deliver the good work of it? We have an example, a program called CML Life, which was first introduced to a small patient community within CML, but was so popular that it was expanded out to all of the patient community within that disease area. And the next step beyond that was to pass that on to the affiliate patient organization, for them to own it and continue to deliver it. So that's a good example of where, it started off as very much a small project that the pharma company was delivering, grew to a bigger project, and in time then was handed over to the patient community for them to continue with funding, obviously.
Right. So in the absence of any questions, which means we'll be tying things up nicely, Deanna, maybe you'd like to have the last word, with See Me, Hear Me is such a great example. What's the future for that campaign? What do V4 hope to turn into? What's on this year's and next year's agenda? I know you've only just caught your breath from finishing, but where do you see it going?
No, it's good. We have a lot of great projects in the pipe. We had some good exchange with the patient community across Europe on what else we awareness, time to diagnosis, referral, different kind of things, make more people understand, help the carers. there are so many areas that you can add on benefit and support the community with. Really, I mean, all this patient engagement and advocacy, this is not a one-stop shop, right? This is like a long-term partnership, a long-term collaboration that you work with. And just to the other point is, it doesn't even stop just one pharma company with the patient community. Why not having more pharma working together, raising awareness about the disease? I think it has benefits again for both sides if this is done. So I think also something that I would just like to consider is like, why do we not partner more on these kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a panel discussion in itself, Diana. Maybe next time. Well, we are at the top of the hour and Jeff is going to kick us off. So I would like to say thank you very much for everyone who's taken the time to watch today. There is a huge wealth of information at the Expo Hall. So there are, you know, apart from the Rare Revolution, Rare Youth Revolution, Teddington Trust, open health stands, there is information to keep you busy for the next month there. So do go and check it out. And for anyone who didn't manage to catch them live, if we can signpost you to Rare in the Media, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, that was on Sunday at 12 o'clock GMT. The Rare Youth Revolution did a section on hot topics where they were discussing things like mental health, transition and relationships and genetics. So please check that out. And of course, Gavin's Physician Best Practices for Supporting Patients' Life Transitions session that was on Tuesday. Do go and check them out on demand. There's such a great lot of information here. So thank you all, especially to Gavin, Shanley, Diana and Stephen for joining us. And we hope everyone has a screen-free weekend after the last 6 days.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
And thank you
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bye.
We'll see you. Thank you. Coming up at the 2 o'clock hour, please join us for the All of Us presentation that will be happening on the with Angie Gonzalez. At 1:30, you're going to see a presentation of Update from My City Med. So join Eden and I for that update. And then at 3 o'clock, we have a leadership panel. That'll be very exciting. And then we'll be topping it off with a case study discussion from Juliet Halls. Thank you so much for everyone who's joined us. And thank you for all the participants again. Thanks to Rare Revolution Magazine. We hope to see you again soon.